Hi everybody, Polly Michel here. I'd like to talk about the proclamation issued by the Howe brothers, the Admiral and the General, at the end of November in 1776. By that time the British, of course, had a series of military victories that actually ended up in William Howe being knighted. They had come ashore at Staten Island, they had taken Brooklyn Heights, they had humiliated the Americans at Kips Bay, they had been temporarily stopped at Harlem Heights, they had gone on to victory at White Plains. They seemed unstoppable. And because armies in the 18th century normally didn't fight in the wintertime, they had settled their armies, both Hessian and British Army units, in towns and villages all across, around New York, and across New Jersey, all the way down as far as Trenton on the Delaware River, and pretty much thought that they would, settle down, hunker down for the winter. At the end of November, the Howes decided to issue a proclamation offering amnesty and pardon, and the Howes had come with sort of an unusual mandate. They were, and they personally, it's still believed, had very little stomach for fighting the revolution. Both of them opposed it in Parliament, but they also came as military commanders. So you had that odd dual role that they both had. They didn't have a lot of power to negotiate peace. All they could do at that time was just offer amnesty and pardon, and called on all colonists to come forward and declare their allegiance to the king, and that once they had declared their allegiance to the king, they would be issued a piece of paper, some sort of a pass or a passport it was called sometimes, that would allow them to move around unobstructed, would protect their property, and would allow them to maintain their lives, to go about their business, to continue on with commerce. And it is definitely true that 2,000 or 3,000 at least loyalists came forward fairly early, and probably some that were fence sitters as well, to sign the proclamation. They didn't really want to have anything to do with the war. And the proclamation was really couched in terms of being peaceable, returning to the peaceable and quiet manner where the Howe brothers had been in the 70s, or they had simply forgotten what had been going on the last few years, but that everybody needed to return to the lives that they used to have, and that they would in fact be protected, that the crown was there to ensure their happiness, to protect their liberties, to protect their property. Certainly words that were familiar to colonists at that time. The problem was also that the Hessians and the British who were stationed across, particularly New Jersey, couldn't behave themselves. That looking for supplies and offering to buy supplies became plunder, and plunder became devastation. And the colonists sitting on the fence, even some of those who were loyalists, started to turn against the British, because the British were destroying, in spite of the promises, in spite of the passports many of them carried, that they were guaranteed that their property would be protected. They had nothing left. And so the colonists themselves, they call it, sometimes it's referred to as the Rising of New Jersey. The local militia units start to rise up and start to do battle with the British and with the Hessians, usually on a fairly small scale, but often very effectively. Washington is desperate. He's on the other side of the Delaware River across from Trenton, and realizes that he's got to do something. He's getting advice from a number of people telling him, you can't abandon the cause now, you've got to do something. And so Washington, with help and advice from a number of people, including spies who lived locally and those who were sympathetic to the Patriot cause, planned a surprise attack, crossed back over the Delaware to Trenton on Christmas night of 1776, and captured, killed, or wounded the Hessian garrison there. Nearly 1,000 soldiers were taken, and really revived the spirits of the spirits of the colonists. It's interesting that Tom Paine bookends the year, Common Sense, at the beginning of the year, making sure that people understand, for those who are still not sure, why it was that kings weren't needed. We didn't need a king in the colonies. We just needed to be independent. And of course, the other end of the year, Paine is writing The Crisis. Paine actually is crossing and escaping from the British and Hessian forces in the fall of 1776. And so The Crisis, reminding people about why we're fighting, and reminding people that it wasn't as dark as it seemed, but that true patriots needed to stand firm at that time. So there were those who were eager to sign. Some signed because they were afraid. Washington, turnaround is fair play. Washington issues his own proclamation after his own series of victories, Trenton and then Princeton. And the war across New Jersey is raging in many towns, and Washington issues a proclamation, a counter-proclamation, if you were, reminding people of what their true allegiance was and telling them that they needed to come into Army headquarters, hand in whatever papers they had been given by the British, and stay true to the cause. And unlike the British, what Washington told people was either you are for us or you're against us. Literally, if you will not hand in your papers, you need to cross over the British lines and stay on the British side of the war. You know, that when you talk about the proclamation of 1776 and whether or not it was revolutionary, whether it saw the American Revolution as something revolutionary, you know, the Howe brothers always seemed to think that it was just a minor thing. It was just a matter of fixing a family squabble, or of a disobedient son admitting that he had been wrong and returning to his father and confidence in his father. I always think when I read the proclamation that the Howe brothers never really saw the revolutionary side. They spoke the language, certainly, of the revolutionaries. They talk about property and liberty and rights, but they never saw those words through the eyes of the American colonists, certainly not through the eyes of those who are fighting for the cause. And I always thought that Washington's response in his counter-proclamation issued in the beginning of January 1777 was a reminder, if anybody needed it, that it was something very real, very genuine and tangible that was being fought for, and it wasn't just a family squabble. It wasn't going to be fixed easily. And I think that really addresses the proclamation. I just don't feel that it was all that. Didn't really see the revolution as anything remarkable. Saw the revolution as something that could be cleaned up, squared away, and that they could move on and continue to live in peace and harmony. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and I look forward to seeing everybody else's.